thank you very much. Thank you for coming tonight, and I hope that this will be a helpful evening to you. We took some of the large areas of questions that people have and tried to put them into three categories, and this evening our subject is, if there is a good God, why is it such an evil world? And if God is a God of love, why is there so much suffering? Now, this is a very practical and personal issue, isn't it? Most people aren't satisfied with philosophical answers, fancy answers. They're interested in practical answers because this subject of suffering and evil affects every one of us. You don't have to travel around very much and visit with people in a personal way before you discover that every home has its heartache. Every heart has its shadows, its sadness. But we want to talk in a very practical way about the subject of suffering and ask the question, why? Why is the world the way it is if there is, in fact, a good God in heaven? As soon as we ask the question, why, we're showing, of course, that we think there's an answer to a question like that. As soon as we ask why, we're really saying that we think there must be a reason for it, that the world is not random, it's not an accident, that there is a purpose behind the universe. Because after all, if there's no designer, there's no design. If everything that we see in the world can be explained by impersonal force working on mindless matter, if, as I said the other evening, you think the world can be explained by the equation nothing plus nobody equals everything, well, then there is no reason and there's no sense even asking the question why. But I think most of us acknowledge that we're not accidents, that somehow there is a purpose, even though it may be difficult to find sometime. Now, you know, God isn't afraid of the question. In fact, although the Bible has some chronological sections, it really is arranged in a little different order than we might expect. And the book of Job, which is the first book of poetry, Hebrew poetry in the Bible, is actually the first book that was written. And the book of Job is all about this subject. Why do bad things happen to good people? What happened in the life of Job? And the great irony is that when we get to the end of the book of Job, God doesn't feel any obligation to explain himself to Job. Instead, what he does is bring Job into his confidence and to remind Job, as he looked around at this amazing world of ours, God does a pretty good job of keeping the universe running on schedule. Scientists can take a rocket and send it out into space so that it rendezvous years later with a particular heavenly body right on schedule. The change of the seasons, the things that we take for granted, the rising of the sun in the morning, the constellations and their movements through space so that still we can chart where we are in the universe with great precision. It's the God of the universe who set things in motion. And so God says, were you there, Job, when I set the bounds of the oceans? Were you there when I tied together the constellations? I did a pretty good job, didn't I, Job? And when you see the God who made this magnificent world of ours, you have to ask, can you trust a God like that? That's God's position. That's God's point with Job in this amazing book that tells of a man who went through deep, deep sorrow. And yet, at the end of it, Job acknowledges that he can trust God, even though sometimes life is very difficult. So God isn't apologetic about the problems in our world. But the good thing is he's sympathetic. He's a God who cares about people. But the second thing I want to point out to you this evening is that the Bible explains that God didn't create evil. He didn't create the world with the chaos that we see around us. He created a perfect world. He created it with perfect people. Human beings were his crowning glory. They were the coup de grace, the ultimate in his creation. And he created us not only with the capacity to enjoy our world around us, but to actually be in fellowship with our Creator. Now, in order to do that, God didn't make us toys or machines. He made us with the capacity to choose to love him or to choose not to love him. If I say to my child, "You tell me you love me," "I love you, Dad." "Thank you, son, that warms my heart." Well, it doesn't, does it? No. Love has to be a choice. You can't force someone, you can't program someone to love you. And so if God was going to have a loving relationship with his creatures, he had to give them the freedom to choose. And that could mean that they would choose not to love him. God gave us real choices, you see. Some people say, "Well, I'm a victim and I'm not responsible for what I do." Well, God says, no. It's part of human dignity that I take you as responsible for what you do. If you go out into the garden and you bring in a cabbage or a tomato and you cut it open and you find out it's rotten, what do you say? "You sinful tomato. You wicked cabbage." The poor cabbage can't help it, but you can help it. And you see, God takes what we do seriously, and that includes our sin. Because if what I do doesn't matter, then I don't matter. But God thinks I do matter, and therefore what I do, he takes seriously. And so we live in a world of choice, and we all know that. And somebody who knows the Bible might say, "Wait a minute, the Bible says we're all born sinners. We were born damaged goods. God surely can't blame us for being sinners." "Ah," says the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 1, "it is true that you were born a sinner. You came by this naturally." And let me just pause for a second. I was speaking some years ago in Ottawa, Canada, and there was a Chinese man there. He was over an engineer on loan to the Canadian government. His father had named him the Chinese words for latitude and longitude, and so he thought he ought to travel. And he had come to Canada. And he thought he'd get a little Canadian culture, and so he came out to church on Sunday, on Easter Sunday. And at the end of the time, he came to me and he said, "That was very interesting. There's a big difference, however, between what you believe and what I believe." And I said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, we believe that men are basically good. And obviously, you believe that men are basically evil." And I said, "Well, that is one of the nice things about Christianity. You don't have to pretend all the time.